Welcome to the Sutherland Report. Thank you again for joining me and giving me the privilege of your time. One of the wonderful things about the connections that you make around the world is that you are connected to some very, very informed, fascinating people. And my next guest is one of those. So a shout out to Matty. Thank you so much. And I'm going to bring on the journalist Ana Beris, and we will have a conversation. So thank you. Anna, lovely
Mark,
to
with
join
your
you.
kind words.
No, well, it's not at all. They are meant. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's much appreciated. I know you've had a busy day, which sounds it's a typical sort of juggle within the world that we are. So thank you so
That's
much.
right.
Anna, you sat down and did a very, very important interview after the 7th of October. It was in Spanish. I do apologize. My Spanish is not good, but you did a very important interview to just get to reflecting on the events on the 7th of October. And can I start by saying, can you remember the 6th of October, and then we'll get to the 7th of October in regard to where things were at then?
Really speaking about the 7th of October, it's one of those, situations in which you'll always have that question, where are you, right?
Mm.
Like people ask, yeah, do you remember where were you when Prime Minister Rabin was murdered? Things
Yes,
like that.
yes.
Now, I don't remember in detail anything special about the 6th of October. But yes, in the general perception of, first of all, Friday, it was a Friday the 6th. It's always a very family day in Israel, in the eve of Shabbat. I assume we gathered with our children. Not every Friday, the three of them are with us and grandchildren. Um, but in Israel, a normal day for a journalist, at least, it's a mixture of these. I don't know if necessarily you can call it tension in every minute, but this awareness of the fact that you never know what might happen. But it was like, what is it normalcy in Israel? You always have in the background things that could erupt. But I don't remember anything special about October the 6th. October the 7th, it all started very early in the morning. It wasn't, at least not in the center of the country, of course, at the border, all there were provocations by Hamas that were misinterpreted, wrongly seen, of course, by those who had to analyze it. But living in the center of the country, it's not that we felt the days before that something special, any special cause for alarm. At 6:30, a few minutes after that, my husband and me, we woke up early as usual, but we're still in bed, Shabbat, Saturday. We could let ourselves have a rest a bit. And suddenly, of course, nowadays, first thing you take the mobile, you check if there were any messages or something. And my husband says, the children are in the shelters. Our children are in the shelters. Our youngest lives with us. But our daughter, she's the one in the middle. She's married, lives in Tel Aviv. She was pregnant back then, a very advanced stage of her pregnancy. She lives with her husband in Tel Aviv. She doesn't have this special protected area inside her apartment, but she has a shelter in the building. She has to go 2 floors down in order to reach the shelter. It's not difficult, of course. And our eldest son, with his wife and 2 kids, were in their apartment in an area near Tel Aviv. They have a protected room inside their apartment, which is easy, of course, to reach. It's in the apartment. It was the children's bedroom. So my husband says he sees the WhatsApp. We have, of course, the WhatsApp group of the family. Each of them, we are in the shelter. We are in the shelter. We are in this protected space. What happened? And really, in a few minutes or seconds, we didn't have an alarm in the city where we live on that day. We had several after that. And so we understood this is something nationwide. And I remember, Mark, when it started, all these terrible news starting, flowing in the networks, in the Israeli media, I remember the phone calls people in the south, in the kibbutzim in the south, made to the correspondents of the different Israeli outlets. They knew personally, let's say the N12, it's channel 2, let's say, of the TV, TV information, not only the bulletins, the programs, but generally that channel, which is very active and very highly watched. They have, of course, let's say, a political correspondent, a correspondent in the north, one in charge of education, one in the south. So those guys, our colleagues, who were in charge of the south, and in general, not because of war, covering the south of the country, and they had contacts with people in the kibbutzim or the moshavim, they started receiving, and also from the central newsroom, they started receiving these calls from people they knew because of other issues, not necessarily conflict with Hamas. Sometimes, yes, because of that. These phone calls saying, "We are in the shelter. We hear the terrorists outside. Where's the army? Please help us." I remember the expression of our colleagues in the news studio, not knowing what to answer. And I remember one of the worst images of the most, something that like woke us up really to understand what was going on. At a certain point, I don't remember at what time, but in the midst of the mid morning, there was this image on the screen of the Israeli TV of terrorists in vans in the city of Sderot. I said, can it be? I mean, it's impossible. How did they manage to cross? I knew, of course, Sderot is very close, a few kilometers from the border, but terrorists in vans inside Sderot, that was, like impossible to believe. And a few hours after that, my son-in-law called. He has family of his sister-in-law. The parents of his sister-in-law, of course, the sister-in-law of my daughter as well, lived in a town called Netiva Asara. Netiva Asara is the Gaza envelope. It means the area adjacent to the border. It's the closest to the Gaza territory. Of course, that's a civilian town. And he told me, Hannah, we have very bad news in the family. The parents of my sister-in-law have been killed by an RPG in Netiva Asara. The terrorists entered there, they killed 21 people, and the truth is that regarding the mother of this relative of ours, for a long time there wasn't, a sheer confirmation. I mean, a total confirmation or an official confirmation that she had been killed, because the body was so hardly damaged. I mean, it was ashes. They couldn't recognize it. For a long time, they couldn't rule out she had been kidnapped. I think she was the last victim to be recognized. So, it's the personal issue, it's a national issue, it's the how this could happen. It was terrible.
And of course, within the population of Israel being nearly 10 million, and with this incident, this awful tragedy that happened then, is that everyone within Israel would be touched by that, of course, because you would know someone, as very sadly in your case within this, which is awful, that you would know someone.
Yes, and this scope expanded, Mark, once, well, it was immediate, it was clear that a war would start. I mean, this war was started by this terrorist invasion. but it was obvious that Israel could not refrain from answering. It's not vengeance,
mm,
it's the need to destroy those who not only assaulted Israel in such a way, but proclaimed once, twice, several times. I have the videos of the Hamas leaders saying that there will be more October the 7th.
yes, yes,
So Israel had to defeat that organization. We're almost 2 years after that, and really it didn't happen yet. We really, no doubt, hit very severe blows to Hamas, but it's still there. And but the moment the war started, and by the way, I must say that many soldiers and officers ran to the south before they were even called by the army. You know,
yes.
it was, we had a feeling of national existence, war, danger. So that's why people. So the moment the war started, it touched, almost all sectors of society, because you either knew something who had been kidnapped or murdered or evacuated from his home in the south, or somebody recruited. Let's remember now almost 900 soldiers fell.
Yes.
Well, more than 400 since the land incursion, to defeat Hamas. So it touched really many, many aspects and many parts of society.
So, Yana, leading up to the awful events, and where I'll just state this to say that this is the biggest loss of life of Jewish people since the Holocaust, and so leading up to that, politically within the country, there was quite a lot of there was protest in regard to judicial reforms and all the rest. It has been mentioned about, of course, Hamas was watching what was happening inside the country and thought this would be an opportunity to then do what the actions that they did. What are your feelings about that and the unity that has then come together in regard to unifying the country?
Well, first of all, if you allow me, Mark, I would like to comment very briefly what you said at the beginning of this question, your comment. It's correct. It was the biggest murder of Jews since the Holocaust, but maybe it's more relevant to remind us, and this is not an idea. I mean, I immediately thought it's correct, but I listened to a podcast recently in the United States interviewing a very known Israeli journalist, Ari Shavit, and he said it, and I grabbed that idea because I think it's very important. And he said, of course, it's the biggest murder of Jews since the Holocaust, but maybe it's more relevant to remember it's the biggest murder of Jews since the foundation of the State of Israel, which
Absolutely.
was meant, of course, to guarantee the horror of the Holocaust never repeats itself.
Mm.
So that's another angle, let's say, to tackle this issue. Now, Hamas had been preparing this assault for a long time. Their goal to eliminate Israel, and of course that was their intention now, genocidal attack. They would have advanced more if they hadn't been stopped by the IDF, which took time, but they managed to do it. They had been preparing this for a long time. I can't rule out, of course, for sure, that the timing was affected, or let's say influenced the decision of when to launch this savage attack by the situation in Israel, by the perception they had, rightly so, that the society was very divided. That was the reason because of which the former or then Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, addressed the nation, a few months before the October the 7th, when he felt what was happening, the big divisions, really, it was a very serious rift within the society. He addressed the nation, warning that the present situation in that moment, of course, was very dangerous for the security of the state. I'm not quoting him literally, but what that was the spirit.
Mm.
Prime Minister Netanyahu decided to fire him, and that was really one of the biggest demonstrations. I ran myself with my son. I came from the city where I live. He came from his city. We met together in a demonstration in Tel Aviv against that. And Netanyahu had to, in fact, overrule his own decision. He put him back. Now we know Gallant is not the Minister of Defense. I ran to that demonstration because I felt it was not correct, so to speak, to fire the Minister of Defense, because he's warning what he thought was a great danger for the nation. Now, I don't argue with those who say those demonstrations, and even more, maybe the warnings by, let's say, an organization like Brothers in Arms. It was an organization of reservists, most of them volunteers, who did not have to keep on going to the reserve. They were beyond the age, many of them, saying that if the country ceases to be a real democracy, they don't want to serve in the military. Now, I can understand those who criticize them very deeply, because there's no doubt that the perception by the enemies that the society is really divided, and that threat that loomed in the horizon, that the fighters, the pilots will not go to war. Of course, that gave them the impression that Israel is crumbling. I can understand those who criticize them, but the other side of the story is that when October the 7th happened, no one of them, not one of the pilots, of the IDF officers who had participated in the demonstrations, conceived even for a moment not to go to war. All of them were heroes of war. And on the other hand, I'm getting a bit into Israeli internal politics. Some of the ministers who referred to those reservists or to those, former officers complaining and demonstrating. And as I said, I can understand the criticism by those who those who criticize them. I can understand the problematic in those demonstrations. But some of them who called in insulting terms those pilots who on the October the 7th didn't doubt even for a moment how to proceed, they are the same ministers who support motion, a law to regulate the exemption of the youth in the ultra-Orthodox sector not to join the army. I think that was unacceptable. It's very problematic, but no doubt the perception of the enemy of the division of Israel, of course, had an influence, at least on the timing. Now, immediately after October the 7th, we had this slogan. We can still see it, in the streets everywhere. Beyachad nenatzeach. Together we will win. I never had doubts about the fact, this is the way I see it, that there is much more that unites us than what divides us. But of course, this is a very heterogeneous society. Israelis argue a lot, it's a very vibrant democracy. There are many differences. And I don't expect it to be, united in everything. There are different positions. It depends on how you argue what are the divisions. I think that spirit of Beyachad Nenatzeach, together we will win, it's less strong, as time elapsed. We are 22 months in war. I think nobody has doubts about the fact that this was launched as an existential war that we had no alternative but to wage after the savage terrorist assault. But as such a long time elapsed, and the discrepancies within the society legitimate about the way the government waged this war, it managed the war, the orders it gave to the IDF, many aspects, discussions about the negotiations with Hamas, what kind of deal you were looking for, whether they wasted time because, all these accusations against Netanyahu that he wants to preserve the coalition and not security considerations. I can't rule out there is an element of that, but I can't judge whether that's his main motivation. All these discussions, of course, affected that Beyachad Nenatzeach, together we will win spirit. I think, still, and I mean, not the conviction that we had no alternative but to launch this war, I mean, to respond to the attack. But of course, there are many, many discrepancies now about what are the things that should come now. And we are talking this Thursday, in a few hours, the cabinet will gather, will meet to take a decision regarding the next steps, whether it is occupation of the whole of Gaza or not. And there are many discrepancies because the IDF chief of staff opposes, assuming that maneuvering militarily in the areas where the IDF has not been until now, and the areas in which we assume the hostages are kept, that could be dangerous for them. So that's a big issue in the discussion in the society. Mark, just to finish this point, and I'm sorry I answered that such
Do
at
not
length.
worry. Do not worry. Do not worry.
I interviewed yesterday an analyst whom I know for a long time, a very conservative one, not always that I agree with him, but he knows a lot, Professor Gabi Siboni. He's in the Misgabi Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy. That's, I think, the full name. And, well, he's critical of the IDF chief of staff, that he's opposing the new plan. He's for the government. Anyway, he told me when I asked about this issue of the hostages, don't you think they will be in danger? That's it, one of the main, not the only one, but one of the main sensible points for Israeli society, let alone for specifically for the families of the hostages. He said they might be in danger, but when we in 76 rescued the hostages in Entebbe, you remember the terrorist attack on Air France plane where they kidnapped the plane to Entebbe in Uganda.
Absolutely.
When we launched that heroic operation, we could also have killed the hostages by mistake. Of course, they were in danger. They were in danger, all the hostages, when the anti-terrorist unit attacked Savoy Hotel in Tel Aviv, which had been taken by terrorists. And when the anti-terrorist unit attacked or launched a counter operation in the Ma'alot school near the border of the north, which had been taken by terrorists, also the hostages were in danger. But if you don't do anything, you let the terrorists win and they will keep up. Everybody has part of reason here. He's also right. It's very, very problematic.
It is, and also you and I are having a discussion over over the last few days, where appalling pictures of, and I'm working at pronouncing the name properly. If I get the name wrong, I do apologize. Which is Ibn David, and the pictures of him digging his own grave in a tunnel.
Eviatar David.
Yeah,
Eviatar
yeah.
David. Yes.
Thank you. And then his brother then speaking digitally to the UN. I mean, those pictures are appalling. Now, in the last sort of few minutes, can you give me a sense of the feelings again, as you've just touched on, the feelings on the ground within Israel, especially in the back of all this accusation around the world of there's no food going in, people are starving. We've seen the New York Times photograph, which they haven't apologized for, but the child suffering from cerebral palsy. This is a long question. And also suddenly, the UK Prime Minister saying, well, we will recognize we're threat of recognizing a Palestinian state unless Israel stops the war. You've got Macron, you've got Carney in Canada, and then we're just and now Albanese in Australia has then piled in as well. Your thoughts on that in the last few minutes? It's a huge question.
Oh, wow, yes. First of all, I must tell you, Mark, um, maybe I almost said as a start, but we've been here for almost half an hour. I know for sure there is Palestinian suffering in the civil society. Palestinians suffer, and I don't wish suffering to
Mm,
any civilian. Although I can't forget the way they celebrated October the 7th.
absolutely.
Although I know that civilians tried to hit hostages, even children, being brought into Gaza by the terrorists. Although I know, for having talked with hostages released, that the crowd wanted to lynch them, entering the places where they were. And the terrorists protected them not because they wanted to help them, but they wanted to keep them as, cards for negotiations. And I know of hostages who have been kept in civilian homes by doctors and attorneys and teachers. So it's very problematic. Even though I don't wish suffering for sure, not to the children, that's for sure. But what has been happening, putting Israel on the, on the center of a world campaign of hatred, is, having a new kind of truth, altering the truth, maneuvering with everything in order to accuse the Jewish state. There is no doubt there is hunger in certain places of Gaza. I mean, there are testimonies, some who can be credible, of people who find it difficult to find food. But the question is not whether there is suffering. Of course, there is suffering. The question is who's to blame. Hamas is to blame because it robs the trucks with the humanitarian aid, not only robs them and prevents them from reaching the civilian population, which is the target of the humanitarian aid, but when it resells the humanitarian aid, and it gets fortunes with that, which they use it for, paying salaries for the new terrorists,
Yeah.
the minors they hire, then they will be in the lists, of those killed by Israel. He was 15, he was 16. Yes, but he was a Hamas member. Now they resell the merchandise that was, the humanitarian aid that was meant to be distributed freely to the population, to merchants. I call them the merchants of death, who take advantage of the suffering of the population and sell it, instead of giving it as they should have done it. And the blame is also on the United Nations, which does not collect the content of the trucks from the Palestinian side of Kerem Shalom crossing, and doesn't distribute them at the pace they should do it, in order for the whole population to have what it can have, because the humanitarian aid comes into the Gaza Strip since the beginning of the war, except for 2.5 months, starting March the 2nd until May 19th. That was the interval in the introduction of humanitarian aid made by Israel in order to pressure Hamas. But knowing that there was in Gaza, there was enough food. The problem is that Hamas didn't share it with the population. Since the beginning of the war, Israel brought humanitarian aid into Gaza. The problem was the distribution, the fact that it didn't reach whom it should have. So that's the real problem. I was talking with a colleague of mine in Spain today. I always say I'm not one of those Jews who see anti-Semitism in each criticism of Israel. It's legitimate to have different opinions, to think Israel is wrong. I don't say Israel is flawless and it's perfect, but you can identify immediately when it's anti-Semitism, when it's demonization, and when it's a legitimate piece of criticism. When when you either repeat without paying attention, without professional seriousness, pictures which have been, put on in a scene as a theater, You put in the front page like the New York Times did, and then at the best situation you put a very small post
Absolutely.
in X saying, sorry, he wasn't a victim of hunger made by Israelis, but a child who had been born, who was born with a serious illness. When you know it in advance that that's performs yeah, a scene of a theater, and you publish it anyway, so that's real. If it's against the Jewish state, yes, that's a kind of anti-Semitism. It's a really, we are living in a crazy world.
And it
And
goes and it has 55 million hits, I believe, and then 88,000 people only seeing this little box that
of
gives
course,
a different account, and the
yes,
damage has been done.
of
Yana, I'm
course,
conscious that we're now at 31 minutes. I don't want to take any more of your time because I think you and I mean, I can have an incredible conversation with you for hours. And can we do this again and continue
of course,
this conversation on another day? But
yes, of course, man.
I just want to thank you for giving me your time, and I'm going to play us out, and then
Okay,
we can pick up again, and I'll say goodbye to you on the other side. But thank you so much for your time.
I hope you have many followers who love English with the South American accent.
Well, that'd be well. I tell you what, it's just got to get it. We've got to get it out there, and it's hearing what is going on the ground, and your perspective is profoundly important because, as you said, we've mentioned this propaganda war, and it's what we are then dealing with under very difficult circumstances. But Anna, thank you so much. Speak to you
Thank you, Mark,
on the
for
other side.
inviting me,
Not
and
at all.
share with me the recording. I will share it in my
I
platform.
I I will do. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.